Hey guys, Keith here. Time for another update video. This one's a little bit overdue, although there's been a bunch of videos come out highlighting some key changes over the last couple of months. I haven't actually done a full release video in some time. So in fact, the last release that has not been covered so far dates all the way back into December with 2019.73, and I'm going to go through to 2020.10, which was released on March 17. So there's a few things to get through. Not as many as you might think, because as I say, some of the bigger changes I've actually put out some very specific videos for, and I won't necessarily go over all of the material in those videos. I'll just touch on some of the high points. And there's also been a bunch of stuff around the servos, and I'm not in the best position to demo that sort of stuff. So some of that stuff I'll also may gloss over a little. But let me start with XSchedule. There's only a couple of minor changes in XSchedule since Christmas. One is actually visible here. Here I have XSchedule, and obviously over here I have the web user interface. One of the things that I have changed is the buttons plugin now does include some key information up the top here, such as exactly which sequence is playing, where it's up to, as well as its end time. And if I come over here and add 10 minutes to the schedule, you'll see that this 7:30 p.m. here changes to 7:40. I used to find during my show that I'd add 10 minutes to the schedule, and I was never quite sure what time it was going to finish, and so I've made sure that the UI now shows that. Both plugins do that. The other buttons plugin also shows it as well, so depending on which one you're using on your phone, either one will show you. If you go to the home page as well, it also shows it down here. The only problem with the one down here is when you add 10 minutes to the schedule, nothing changes, but if you hit the refresh button, it reloads, it does show it. So I don't know whether that's something else I should spend time on, but I tend to find I spend more time on the plugin screen when I'm out supervising my show. Adding 10 minutes seems to be a lot easier there. The only other change to XSchedule over the last couple of months was in 2020.5, where there was a minor change to the API. Deactivate specified schedules. So these were the original APIs for activating and deactivating schedules, but there were some users who said, well, actually we want to be able to disable them all or activate them all. And so the new APIs are here: activate all schedules and deactivate all schedules. So the way people use this is they actually create a whole bunch of schedules over here, and they basically want to be able to deactivate them all so they can selectively activate one of them. And so having an API that basically lets you go and do that makes their life when they're automating XSchedule a lot easier. So they're the changes in XSchedule, very, very minor since the end of last year. So the rest of the time we'll spend on xLights. So we'll go all the way back to December. And the first one here was around 3D model rotate tool. Gil had a lot of trouble getting this to work. And when he did eventually get it to work, it was kind of nice. So let's just drop a tree in here. So what he did was he made it so that when you've selected multiple models and you use the rotate, you can now rotate the group. That never used to be possible. There was also anomalies in the rotation, particularly once you'd started to rotate things. If you went and then chose a different axis, it would get all muddled up and things would jump around almost randomly. And Gil spent a bunch of time. Matrix math has never been my scene, but Gil seems to get it really well, and he's managed to get this rotation stuff working pretty slick. So now you can select all of your trees and rotate them together, etc., which was previously difficult to do. So that's a really awesome usability enhancement. The next one, now we're in 74, add to check sequence some opinionated views on undesirable settings. I think I covered this in my beginner seminar, but basically the preferences, because there's no settings menu anymore, are all located here under preferences. There are some settings in here that generally speaking we don't recommend, or we do recommend. So for instance, we would recommend backup on launch. We definitely recommend backup subfolders. Where's sequences? Render, save FSCQ on save, we'd recommend, etc. In fact, we recommend it so much we'll warn you if you try to turn it off. And now when you run check sequence here, and you get the check sequence results, you'll see here that it's got this potentially problematic settings where it'll basically say, well, look, you're not backing up subfolders. If you're not storing your sequences in the root of your show folder, then basically they're not being backed up. And so we kind of try and warn you about that. And not saving the FSCQ file is such a serious problem. I call it an error. While I know there are people who will explain why this is a good idea, I maintain it's a stupid idea and you shouldn't do it, because effectively what it means is when you save your sequence and you shut down xLights and you reopen xLights, basically your FSCQ file is it's either not there, which means it's blank, or it's in an unknown state, which means you still have to do a render all. Now, maybe there are times when that makes sense, but given that FSCQ files are generally pretty small these days, given that it takes almost no time to save them, there really is no reason to turn this off, other than to create problems where you say it doesn't render correctly, and then everyone gets upset about it, and it turns out, well, it's all because you turned it off. So we should definitely save it, and we should definitely back up our subfolders. So that's all good. And there's a few other settings that it's opinionated about, and it will warn you or give you errors. Generally, they're warnings as being a bad idea. So Gil, allow 3D view objects to be group rotated and translated. What Gil means there is, again, if you add a mesh object, and I'm not going to do that because I have to go hunt down my mesh objects, etc. But basically a similar thing to what we were doing with the models here. If you've got images and grid lines, we can throw another grid line in. Again, if you go to the rotate menu and you start to rotate them, you can rotate those meshes now as a group. Again, something you previously couldn't do. Allow all models and objects to be selected. I'm not quite sure what the distinction there was, but basically everything now allows you to act on groups, except maybe for size. Not sure you can size. Oh yeah. Okay. Scott, added HinksPix export dialog to generate standalone mode files. This is in the tools menu. There's this HinksPix export where effectively Scott's added support to create files which can then be exported either onto an SD card or sent off to the HinksPix controller and then used with the HinksPix show player. So it just basically formats those things for the HinksPix. I don't have a HinksPix. I'm not going to demo this. I'm sure if you need more information about this, I'd reach out to Scott Hansen. I'm sure will be more than happy to walk you through it, or even make you a video and show you how to use it. Group scaling is obviously, we put this into scaling mode and we can scale groups according to the various dimensions. So you can scale all your trees at once, etc. So that's all in place as well. So the next one relates to, let's get out of 3D mode. I don't think we need that as much anymore. The next one relates to support for the GDTF model file format. So the GDTF model format is a format which is used to describe DMX type devices, and there's this website gdtf-share.com where a whole bunch of different types of DMX stage lighting and other sorts of DMX devices are, and associated with these files is basically these GDTF files which you can now import. So effectively, just like you would import any other model, you come up to here, you now need to choose your GDTF file. This is why I didn't have the device type set. All right, so okay, that's why it didn't work. I had to select the file type down there, but there's a GDTF file, and if you import it, it will bring it in. Now, in this case, it's come in as a DMX moving head. There are a bunch of states that have been defined to support the various properties of those models. So, some of the things that device supports are all being brought in. So basically this GDTF file is a file that describes the properties of that particular DMX device. And from memory, I think I also set the strand names. I did. So all the node names here have been defined. And so when you come to sequence it, this thing's got 56 channels. It's not a small device, but you'll know what every particular channel is for without you having to go and look up the data sheet, because everything's been brought in as part of that import of the GDTF format. It's showing up as an X, possibly because it's come in as a DMX moving head 3D, which may be appropriate. I think I try to guess what sort of device it is based on the various channels that are in place, and you'll see that it's actually set some of the channels up here, the tilt channel and the pan channel, but maybe not everything. So you may have to go and still look at some of those channel names to set them up. But this gives you basically another library of all of the various DMX models out there. So there's that one. DMX models, so you'll notice that the DMX models have changed when you select DMX. There's no longer just one thing here. There's a whole bunch of them here. And so Gil's basically separated each one of these out into its own DMX model type. That's significantly reduced the number of properties that you have to deal with when you're just doing something very simple like a floodlight. You can see that it really only has the sorts of channels that are relevant to a floodlight, whereas if you're going to drop a skull down, then you get the massive array of things that you need. He's also reorganized the properties, so he's brought each one of these things under a whole bunch of related settings and enhanced those settings. And he's also introduced a much more generic servo model. And the servo model, in this case, it's just got one servo, but you can actually come up here and say there's 10 servos. And it's basically gone and created 10 servos. Gil did a video on this. You can also set individual images or meshes to represent each element, and you can build some quite complex modeling of various 3D devices. But I'm not going to go into it. There is some videos that Gil put out on his YouTube channel. It's under Gil, so here it is here where he's done a skull demo. And I think this xLights 3D view preview, and even this Servo Lyrics one, and this one as well. So there's literally, these last 5 videos cover the DMX model. So I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail. I strongly suggest you go and have a check out of Gil Jones' channel. While you're there, join one of the other 761 subscribers. Yeah, Gil doesn't put out a huge number of videos, but often when he works on a feature, his features are always quite rich and deep, and watching his videos and getting a feeling for how they work, you definitely want to be checking his videos out. And that could never be truer than the DMX stuff. There's a whole bunch of changes here that were associated with Gil getting the advanced capabilities into those DMX models. Next one, Scott rewrote the select effect panel. The old panel was really powerful, but lots of people found it hard to use. It was a bit of a programmer's tool, and that's partially my fault. I kind of like the power of it, but it left everyone else somewhat confused and underwhelmed. If you go to View, Windows, there is a Select Effect window here. Where is it? Why am I not seeing it? Get rid of the Effect Assist. Here it is here. Let's dock it up here. And so effectively, if I go and throw a couple more pinwheels down here, I can now come up here and say, choose the pinwheel. I can select all the models. and it basically will select them all, and now I can do things like bulk edit them and so forth. So when you've got a sequence, you've got a large number of effects all spread all over the place, and you go through it and you say, well geez, I really just need to grab all of my pinwheels, or I need to grab all of my on effects on this particular model because I want to change their color or whatever it happens to be. This select effects panel is a way to very quickly grab a whole bunch of effects that otherwise might be quite hard to grab, because you're going to spend all of your life scrolling around left and right, etc. And then at some point you'll forget you had to hold the control key down and all your selections will be lost. Very frustrating. The select effects panel is a very quick way to do that thing without having to do a whole bunch of manual work. Prevent creation of the show folder in program files on Windows. So I've seen a number of people do this where typically new users, they've just installed xLights, it's been installed inside the inside the program files folder, and they'll come up here and they'll say, oh yeah, so xLights is installed in C, program files, xLights, right? And they'll want to select that folder and make that their show folder, or they'll create a show folder inside there and they'll want that to be the show folder. And now xLights is going to give you an error and say, look, that's just not on. It's a bad idea because effectively you then have to run xLights as an administrator, because the program files folder is generally locked down on most machines. I mean, maybe if you're using XP or something really old, it isn't. But on all modern versions of Windows, these folders are reasonably protected as a way in which to stop people from installing software with certain privileges, etc. So it's a bad place to put your show folder. Don't be doing that. And it won't let you do that now. Now, I think some people did get stung because they already had their show folders there and it got a little bit complicated. But yeah, it's just a bad idea. Update the import-export capability of DMX models and provide the ability to use a model downloader. So, okay, so this is another one of Gil's, and we're back in the DMX land again. The import-export, you've always been able to export the xLights model, and that's also true of these various DMX models. So once you've set one up, if you've got one and someone else has got a similar DMX prop and they want to use your model, you can export it to an XModel file and import it back in again. Gil also, I think it's here actually, in the model downloader. Give us a second. So if you shrink up Bosco Studios, you'll find that there's actually this DMX model library, and this is where Gil has basically configured a number of DMX models, and if you'd like to contribute to these, I'm sure we would be more than willing to add in new DMX models that you may want to share with others. But he's basically created some interesting servo models, etc. Now you've got to remember that unlike something like the skull, which might be very specific to a vendor, Gil's also built this servo model to enable you to build your own animated props. And in this case, this one here happens to be a single servo snowman, and with that servo, basically, I think I can do this. Range of motion. I think if I set the minimum limit here, does it change? Maybe not. But basically what it does is it pivots this arm here around, and so it becomes basically a waving arm snowman, and so he set this up and he shared it. So if you wanted to build a waving arm snowman with a single servo, here is a model that you could download and use. Now of course if you wanted to add a second arm, you could do so. You'd obviously need to increase the number of servos and configure that servo, but yeah, that would all be good. Here's the static image. So this is the static image. One is for the background, the snowman, and then he's got a motion image here, and this here controls its rotation, etc. around and how far it goes and how that maps back to the actual servo values, etc. So yeah, very cool. Okay, what else have we got here? The DMX area flood. So we've always had this DMX flood. Well, for quite some time we've had this DMX flood. It did create an area flood. So if you've got a flood that's really low, lighting up a square area, he did create this area flood as a slightly different floodlight model to use in your display. Okay, other ones here. All right, I think that's it. I'm not going to go into the rest of those. As I said, check Gil's videos out, etc. Add bulk edit to the active property on models and objects. For some time now on our models, there has been this active property. It's hidden down here in the appearance settings. And basically, if you make models inactive, it hides them off the display. They still exist. You can still sequence them. It just doesn't draw them. And a place where this can be quite useful is if you've got some absolutely massive P5 panel with thousands of pixels. Sometimes drawing the P5 panel can actually cause xLights to lag a bit, and so you can make it inactive, hide it. It doesn't draw, which means it doesn't slow xLights down as much. But in this particular change, you can now bulk edit that property, and so you can make multiple things inactive. Interestingly, these are actually still selected, so if I bulk edit and make them active again, they will come back. If I create a group from these, call them stars. So if I right click and make these inactive, bulk edit inactive, and if I come up to this group that I've just created, the stars group, and I've selected on it, and I come over here and right click and bulk edit and make them active, it actually selects them. It's just you can't see them, and so you can bring them all back again at the group level as well. So yeah, bulk edit on the active property. All right, let's quickly duck into the preferences dialog, which I kind of glossed over earlier. So Dan here has taken the old settings menu and consolidated everything into a preferences dialog. In doing so, he's managed to group things together into some reasonably sensible categories to try and make a little bit easier to find preferences and to also stop that menu growing out of control. And it wasn't well sorted either, and so this brings a bit of order to it. The tabs that he's added here, he has the backup tab. It's a little bit different than it's also changed a little bit later in that I brought some of the backup directory settings into this tab as well. They're also present here in these subfolders. It's the same settings. I've just left them in both places for now. I'd actually like to get rid of this subfolders button and move everything into the preferences. I just haven't got there yet. But all the backup settings, like how often you purge and when it backs up, etc., are all on this panel. The view panel controls a lot of the visual settings. So the tool icon size is the size of the icons up here. The OpenGL settings. In the past, people have had some issues with OpenGL, and sometimes you need to force xLights to use older versions. It's not that common, but it does happen from time to time. The model handle size controls on the layout tab how big the model handles are. I like them really big. The effect assist window pops up when you're in sequencer and you're doing things. I tend to like that always off. And the play controls on preview. If you float the play control, the house preview, it will show the play controls, so you can actually start and stop the sequence actually on the preview window. And the auto show house preview makes that window appear automatically when you start to play, and then it gets hidden again when you stop playing. And so if you want to have a really large house preview when you're playing your video and you're on a laptop with a single screen, auto show can be quite useful to minimize the use of real estate when you're sequencing, but maximize it when you're viewing the sequence playing. The effects grid controls the effects grid, so it controls what gets drawn where you drop effects and how big things are, whether or not you have a waveform. So on my laptop, I like to have the small waveform because it uses less real estate. Also, what happens when you double click on an effect? Does it play it or does it select the timing? That sort of stuff. Or edit text, sorry. So that's useful if you're using lyric tracks, etc., and you want to be able to double click and edit. If you don't, whatever the reverse is, you have to hold the shift key down to do that. Sequences control some of your rendering controls, your model blending, whether that defaults to off. I generally like it defaulting off. The render cache, which can speed up some of your rendering, but uses a bunch of disk space and a bunch of memory, so you may or may not want to turn it on. Your auto save intervals also here, and your FSCQ version, which I would generally keep as V2Z standard unless you particularly need one of the older formats or the other formats. Your output, so this is where you'd set up E131 syncing, or you'd force the output each card that your traffic goes out of, duplicate suppressing, and also this is where you can control whether you're integrating with Xfade and XSchedule, and I'm not going to go there, those things have all been covered before. Your random effects, so this is where you control which effects are laid down when you do random effects, so you can deselect a bunch of effects and say, no, when I do random effects, I only want these effect types, so you can control that here. Your colors, for people that like to fully configure the look and feel of the colors, you can do that here. And then other is everything that was left behind, so you can put in your email address here that gets included in your log file when you have a crash log to tell us who crashed, so that I think I've only done it once or twice where we reach out to the person and ask them for potentially some more information about a crash that they might have had. This is also where you can turn on hardware video decoding and your package sequence options as well. So all buried in the preferences dialog now, a lot easier to get to, a lot more logically organized. I press cancel. I probably shouldn't have done that. I actually did want to change some of those settings. All right, so now we're up to 2020.5. The first one relates to breaking down words and phrases, and this is a new developer, Pete. I cannot remember his surname. I apologize, Pete. He introduced a change around lyrics. I don't know. Let's all right. Let's double click. Let's set a lyric track. Joy to the world. Let's break down that phrase, and let's just delete one of these. And let's change this to be, I don't know, let's call it Joy to Me. Okay, and we'll break this down again. Okay, and so it's overridden it, right? It's changed it from Joy to World to Me. It's deleted everything that was there. But what if I came into here and locked this effect? So locked, you can see it's got a red background. Hopefully, if the video resolution is good enough, this effect, this lyric track is now locked. And so what if I now go back into Joy to Me and change it back to, I don't know, Hark the Herald. Oh, it's probably not going to work. I don't know. Hello world. I'm lazy. Okay, now let's break down the lyric track. And you'll see that it's actually said, well, actually, no, there's locked words in the way. So now it won't overwrite things because that me is in the way. And so it can't actually break down hello world without deleting the me. So it refuses to do it. And so that's Pete's enhancement, is to have the breakdown of words and phrases as well respect anything that happens to be locked inside your lyric track. Export model as a GIF image. This is kind of cool. This is something that Scott added. So I've got a matrix here. There's a butterfly effect. What I can do here is I can come over here and say model, render and export. I could probably just export it, but let's render and export it. And I can say I want to put that to the cube folder here, and I want to call it matrix2.gif. And so if I now go to that desktop folder where the cube is, let's go there. you'll see that it's created this matrix2.gif file, and if I double click on it, you can see that it's created an animated GIF that basically contains that butterfly effect. Now, you'll notice that it's actually rendered it over the entire course of the sequence, and because I only dropped, a couple of seconds, this GIF file is mostly black. So there's another change, and it'll come a little bit later. But now one of the things you can also do is when you right-click and do model, rather than rendering and exporting the model effects, you can actually just export the selected ones. And if you've selected multiple, it will render everything between the beginning of the first one and the end of the last one that you've selected. And so if I go and create this, let's call it 2A. So now there'll be a 2A file here. There it is. And if I double click on it, you'll notice that it has brought up the butterfly effect, but there's no blackness. And that's because it's actually just rendered and saved as a GIF that particular section. Now, if I had multiple effects here, if I insert a layer above, and I don't know, let's throw down a balls. Always looks awful. I don't know, let's add a bunch of multicolored balls. If I come back to this butterfly effect and come over and do model, render and export the selected effects, let's call this one 2B, and I go back and I bring up 2B here, you'll notice that it doesn't just render the render the selected effect. It renders everything on that model at that time, and so because the balls were sitting above it, they're included in the GIF file that is produced here. Okay, so yeah, that's just something to realize. Now this could be really useful because you can now take this GIF and you can go and put it on another matrix and reuse the effect that you've already created here. I have no doubt that some of the people selling sequences will start to package some of their matrix effects up like this because it provides a better and more scalable way of using effects on other models. You're not subject to the same behavior when you take an effect and apply it on a model of a different size. It can sometimes distort, etc. And GIFs don't. And today I believe they largely use video files. They may find GIFs are a little bit easier to use, particularly if it's not too long. AC mode. I've read a couple of posts where people have been complaining about AC mode, and I'm not saying they're wrong. In fact, I suspect that they're right, but they're complaining about some of the behavior that you would get when you're in AC mode. For those who've never been in AC mode, you get into AC mode just by clicking on the AC toolbar. And so what they were saying is, if you're here and you're in select mode and I'm moving it around with the keyboard and I highlight some things and I press the D key, etc., it would jump out and you would no longer be able to move the keyboard around. Well, now it has a tendency to stay in select mode, and so you can actually be a lot more you can be a lot more effective in using the keyboard when you're in AC mode with just some minor tweaks here, by not taking it out of select mode as you move around and you press keys, etc. So hopefully that'll, for people that do use AC mode, hopefully you're finding that a little bit more intuitive to use. Ordered node selection in the submodel node selection dialog. I did make a video on this for people that haven't seen it. Effectively, in the submodels dialog here, when you add a submodel, you can now, if you double click on the row here, there's an option over here called ordered selection. It's on by default. And when you make your window big enough, and I know that there's a problem here, you get this text field down here, which is where it's going to list the nodes that you've selected. And so effectively when you come over here and double click on a node, it appears down here. And as you select things in whatever order, it remembers the order that you clicked on them in. And that's really powerful because sometimes when you're submodeling a prop where the nodes are not in the order that you want to include them in your submodel, the ability just to double click on things and put them in the order. So let's imagine that these weren't in order and that I was using the strategy where I would jump over one and then I would come back again. Well, you can do things like say, well, I know I need to go there and there and there and there. Or you could say, yeah, no, actually I want to do in order. And even if the numbers aren't in order, you know that the submodel will be created that way. And the order of the nodes in the submodel is actually really important to how the render buffer is created. So this is quite powerful. There's a whole video where I go in and I provide real worked examples of why you'd want to do this, etc. So I strongly suggest you head over to my YouTube channel. Can I go to my channel? I can. And so there's this ordered node selection creation video here that I strongly suggest you pop in and watch. Again, subscribe, you'll get notifications whenever any of my new videos come out, and you'll be able to see exactly what I mean and what's going on there. Increase maximums in the custom model size. All that means is that some people are building bigger and bigger props, and so there's now I think their maximum's now like 500 or something wide, which is an insane size grid. But someone somewhere decided that they need, I'm not sure it can go any, oh no, it still goes higher, maybe it goes as high as 1,000, which is again just an insane number of pixels. In fact, a triple L, it's an insane number. But hopefully that means that no one's going to have problems and run out of, no. Oops. Oh yes, abandon. So yeah, so, and similar thing with the circles model. Some of the newer circle props that are coming out from some vendors have got, again, absolutely insane number of pixels. I think James has got one with over 1,000 pixels, and this used to top out well south of that. But this now can go, I think it's 2,000 pixels in a circles model. Well, that's nodes per string. So yeah, you can now go substantially more. Okay, add dominant frequency color effect to VU meter, which chooses a color based on the dominant frequency. I added this. I'm actually not real happy with it, but hey, it's there. So we're going to need a musical sequence. So this is a VU meter thing. And basically what it does, it's this dominant frequency color. And effectively what it allows you to do is you can choose multiple colors here. And what it does is it basically does a frequency breakdown of the music, and then depending on which frequency is dominant, it chooses one of the colors out of the ones chosen here. So if the frequency that is dominant is at the lower end, then the white will appear. If the frequency that's dominant, i.e. the loudest frequency at any one particular frame, is at the high end, the yellow will appear. And so I don't know. My hope was that you would get something that change color with the frequency ranges. The problem is music's often quite complex, and I find it just flashes a lot. So I'm not sure I'm entirely happy with it. The sensitivity just controls how dominant the frequency has to be before something happens, and if you set it too high, it just goes black because basically it's not dominant enough. You can also control the frequencies that it responds to by playing with the start and the end notes here. So if you set that quite narrow, then it's only going to look at the dominant frequencies within that limited range. And so if you just wanted to use it for the bass, you could set the bass down here, and it's only going to jump around based on what's going on in the bass notes and so forth. The color gradient, basically, instead of treating this like absolute colors, it treats it like a gradient all the way across, and so you'll get slightly different outcomes. Yeah, I'm pretty sure no one will ever use it, but what the hell. Next one's xLights controller discovery. So when you click the Discover button here, I don't have any controllers plugged in right now. It reaches out onto your network and tries to find controllers. And we've been, for a while now, we've been finding all of your FPP controllers. We used to find ArtNet controllers, not that there's many controllers out there that really support ArtNet discovery. But the xLights have always had their own discovery protocol. And we'd actually built that quite some time ago, because the way in which you configure a xLights controller is using exactly that same protocol. And so now, if you happen to have a xLights controller on your network and you click the Discover button, it will actually find your xLights controllers. And if you don't already have them listed here in the new Setup or Controller tab, it will add those xLights in so that you can configure them. Again, short of me running into the other room and turning on my xLights, it's hard to show. All right, so the next enhancement is obviously the controller tab itself. This has changed pretty significantly in a number of different ways. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, because again, check out my YouTube channel. There's a couple of videos here that talk about the Setup tab changing and how it's changed and so forth. And so I strongly suggest you head over there. But I will show a couple of things. So when you want to add a controller, you would typically add Ethernet. Most of our controllers are Ethernet. You'd use USB if you have a Renard or a Law controller attached to a dongle to your laptop. If your Renard or your Law controller is attached to a Falcon controller or an FPP, then you would be using E131 or the Ethernet protocols, not USB. USB is only when the controller is physically plugged into a USB port and then maybe an RS485 Ethernet cable, type cable to the controller. Null is used if you just want a bunch of channels. So let's imagine that this was an F16 V3. Now typically I wouldn't put the model here, I'd put where it is or what it does. So you know, this might be my inside controller. I do have a Falcon that I use to control all my windows, etc. It's my inside controller. You can put a description field in here. You can choose your vendor. This is a lot easier. It used to be a huge list. Now it's a much smaller list, so you can come in and say, yeah, it's a Falcon, it's an F16 V3, and I have, maybe I've got no expansion boards. This one here has one expansion board on it. You obviously need to put in its IP address. Let's put the default in for a Falcon. And you can set all of the other properties here. You can also set the universe count, so you can come down here and say there are 20 universes. If you want to set those to all different sizes, you can come down here and set different sizes. This green background here shows the universes that have props already on them. And in fact, if you hold your mouse over it, it tells you which props are on each one of those universes. So the first one has a circle, the custom, and the custom 2. This one has a circle and the custom. This one has the custom and the matrix, and so forth. But you can also come in here and say, actually, no, that's only 34 channels for some reason. So they don't all have to be the same size. But if you do that, don't go and uncheck this, because everything will get reset back, which you may or may not want to do. Well, that was odd. That should have stayed set. Anyway, when I click cancel, I should have left that set. So yeah, a slightly different way to look at things. The idea is that you would end up with one row here per controller that you're actually using. There is also the ability to do auto layout of the models. That is when you start to get into the visualizer and the ability to organize props and put them onto ports. Again, I've already made a video about that, which is the visualizer and model assignment. I strongly suggest you want to watch this video, because it really starts to show why we changed everything and the sorts of capabilities that you can get. Yeah, for some people, they're not going to like it, right? We know you don't like it because you're used to controlling exactly which universe each prop is on, and you like setting start channels for each model. But for a bunch of people that really are new to the hobby and don't really want to get into all of that, using things like the auto layout models and setting controller ports on individual props, etc., using the visualizer is just so much easier. So, you know, here's my F16. Now it's got 32 ports because I said I've got an expansion board, so it knows about that. It knows that there's 4 serial ports. And I can just come over here and I can just drag and drop my model. So I have a matrix here with 16 strings. I drop it onto port 1. It's going to use 16 ports. That's what you'd expect it to do. You know, if I've got the star and I want to put that onto port 17, I can drag it down here and I can put star 2 on the end of it. I can put the circle model. I say, actually, no, I forgot that's at the beginning, and I can just drag and drop them down. And it will, along the way, reset all of the start channels and configure all the things that you used to have to configure manually automatically. Go and have a look at my video. It explains all of this in a lot of detail. You also get a lot of tooltips here that bring all the details about the model here so that you can see them. You can see here that I've got too many pixels on this port, right? This is now saying I've got 1100 pixels, and you can't have 1100 pixels on a Falcon. So I can move them down here, and it says, well, hang on, that's still a problem. Well, why is that a problem? Well, because 1100 is too many. It's only 1024 that you can have on a port. So I'm never going to be able to put that circle model there. I'll have to go back and change some settings on it, and so forth. All right, so that's the visualizer, etc. All right, let's keep going. Back to the sequencer. The next one there was an option for a while now to be able to divide up timings. So if I select these 2 timing marks, remember you have to unselect them to be able to grab them like that. There used to be a thing here called halve the timings. There's now a thing called divide the timings. And what this allows you to do is basically say, I want to divide these timings up into 3. And so, you know, it's going to divide this one up about here, and then this one about here and about here, because it divides it into 3. And so you can now pretty much divide timings up by whatever. So if you happen to have marked out the bars, you know it's 3/4 timing, then you can divide the timing marks up and get your beats very easily. So that's divide timings. That's also undoable. So if I come here and press Control Z, it will undo it as well. That previously wasn't there. What's the next one? The next one is Spirograph effect, which is this one here. So let's throw it down on a matrix. There's so many colors. Spirograph effect is you need to create some separation here, and potentially some movement or animation. And the challenge with the Spirograph effect has always been, maybe it's gone too far, has always been that, you know, the thickness of everything is just 1. But now there is a width setting here where you can come in here and you can control the setting, or the width of the lines, which is useful, not so much if you're putting it on a 50x16 matrix, but if you were throwing this on a P5 panel with hundreds of pixels high and hundreds of pixels wide, the old Spirograph effect did not look that great. And now it looks a lot better because you've got this ability to add thickness to the Spirograph effect. Okay, now the next one, so with, and this is true both for DDP as well as E131, for some controller types, Dan's added auto upload the configuration. Now for FPP, this is fine. There's no reason not to do this. Basically, when you turn on output to lights, it will take a second or 2, but it will upload, much like ZCPP does, to the controller and reconfigure the controller, but only when the lights are turned on. So you have to make sure you turn everything on in the right order, etc. But it will upload all of the configuration to the controller, assuming you've configured all of your settings and everything to do the upload to the controller. Dan's also added it to the Falcon. I don't know whether that's a good idea. I know in my conversations with Dave previously, he cautioned me about uploading or changing the Falcon configuration too frequently because it has a small amount of built-in flash memory, and while flash memory does last a fair bit of time, there is a defined lifespan to it, and whereas FPP you can always pull out your memory stick and put a new memory stick in, you don't really have that option on the Falcon. So to be honest, use this on the Falcon at your own risk. FPP, low risk. If this is what you want to do it. It's a bit slower than ZCPP, but you know, it works, kinda. Okay. Protocol settings and constraints to the visualizer. You can, I don't think I showed this, but you can actually set the protocol here at the port level. Obviously, it makes more sense to do it down here. So we can come in here and say that these are all, I don't know, LX12803s. And so when you put your mouse over this, it's changed the protocol. So you don't have to keep going back to the models to do things. The other thing that we've done is these things are now aware of what sort of controller they're on. So whereas previously, if I'd come down here to the port number, I could have set this to 48 because most controllers allowed 48, but it won't allow that anymore. And the reason it won't allow it anymore is because up here it knows that it's on the inside controller, and it knows that the inside controller's only got 32 ports. So it's not going to let me change this to any number above 32. Oops. It's also smart enough to know which protocols that controller supports, and it will only let me use the protocols that that controller supports. So if I come back here and set this to something that's much more limited, like the SAN devices, let's set it to the 682 version 5 firmware. Okay, so it knows that it doesn't support 20 universes, but it also knows here that, you know, the protocols are more limited, and that protocol that we'd previously set this to is actually not supported on this particular thing. It'll also hide any of the settings here that are not supported on a particular controller as well. So you know, they're starting to become this much greater awareness through xLights of the controller and the constraints around the controller, but it's all done in a way which hasn't complicated xLights. So we're pretty happy with that. All right, there was a change that was also introduced here around controller names, model names, etc. It used to be that if you put a space on the end of the model name, it would accept it, and you know, it caused all sorts of weird and wonderful issues. So that's now illegal, and there's a whole bunch of changes, some of which caused bugs in 2020.9, where it's trying to basically clean all of that up and get rid of the spaces. And the reason we want to get rid of them is because it did create issues where people thought that they chained everything correctly, but they didn't realize there was a space there and it was missing, and things would not work properly. So it's easier just to say that's no longer legal, and it's removed it all. All right, so now we're finally up to 2020.10 for those of you who have stuck with us, and there's some pretty cool things in 2020.10. So that was where the render of export of models and, you know, just a certain range came in. You can also now when you're down here, and you know you want to add models into the group, well, some of these things are already groups, and so you can now hide those model groups. So now you're only seeing the models to add. So if you're not a sort of person that builds groups of groups, and generally I don't, you can suppress those so you can't see them here. You can also suppress submodels and just see the actual models themselves as well. The other thing you might have noticed here is there's now this X center offset and Y center offset, and this is really, really powerful. So let's have a look at this 2 matrix group, because this lets me this shows it quite well. So this 2 matrix 25 has got an X center offset of 25 and a Y center offset of -25. And so what's that saying is that, you know, and these don't have to be together, they can be apart. What it's saying is, and I'll just put them together because it makes it a little easier to see when we demo it. What it's saying is the center of this particular group, don't make it the real center. What I want you to do is I want you to, let's go back to it. And this scale's actually minus 1000 to 1000. So let's imagine I wanted to move the center 50% of the way over to here, right? And maybe put it at the top. So what I need to do is I need to move the center 500 to the right because 1000's here, 0's here, minus 1000's here. So I want to go 500 to the right. So we'll set this to 500. And the Y center offset, we want to go to the top. So that's going to be 1000 up. So we'll set this to 1000. And so this model group is not centered in the middle anymore. The natural center of this model group is now over here. Now, where's this useful? Well, it's really useful if what you think of as the center of your display is not actually the center of your layout and you're doing an all models group, etc. And you want to center everything on a particular prop. So that was 2 matrix. Let's rename that so that I know, don't forget which one it is that I'm using. We'll put demo after it. But let's imagine we go and create another model group here. This is demo 2, I don't know. And let's imagine that I want the center of this model to be maybe the center of this circles model here. So that when I drop an effect on it, which has a center, something like a pinwheel, and that's probably what we'll use, I want the pinwheel to be centered on this prop here. And so now I need to, and I do need to guess a little. I haven't really added a visualizer for this yet, but you know that's probably that's what it must be at least 90% of the way. So if the center's here, you know, roughly geographic center of this group is here, this has got to be at least 90%. So let's make the X center offset 900, and the Y center's about here. So I reckon that's about what, maybe 60% of the way up. Maybe half. Let's try half. So let's try putting that center there and let's see what happens when we try and use these 2 model groups. So let's go and create a new sequence. And let's click on our pinwheel. And for dramatic effect, let's get it set up correctly. We're nice and thick. And let's take our pinwheel and drop it. Let's first of all drop it onto our demo matrix. Remember, we set this to be, we're trying to set this to be 3/4 of the way across and at the top. And that's exactly where the center of the pinwheel now is, right? If this was the normal center, we move the center across 50% and up to the top. And so every effect that has a center will now be centered up here whenever we sequence on this group. Now there used to be ways to achieve this by throwing dummy models in and dragging the center off to the left or the right or whatever, but you don't need to do that now. Let's try it on our other one, our demo 2 group. So remember, we were trying to set the center here to be in the center of our circles, and we don't seem to have really achieved it. Let's make this a little bigger so that it spins around. It's hard to tell, but I think we're a little bit low. And maybe not far enough to the, it's so hard to tell, isn't it? Can we slow it down? Slow it down, what's it doing? Oh, it's so hard to tell. And this is the challenge, and I'm sure we can make this better. I would actually love to be able to, when you're in this mode here, to draw a cross or something on the screen to say, hey, this is the center. Unfortunately, that's not as easy as it might sound, so I have to do some work on that. Now, this only works with minimal grid, so if you're grid per preview, these things are disabled and ignored, so you have to be in minimal grid, but almost all of your groups are probably minimal grid already, so you'll have access to this. Add the ability to generate submodels from custom model slices. So this is why I've got the cube here. So what happens if I wanted to sequence the faces of this hollow cube? Now, yeah, I can definitely put something onto it, but I just want the pixels that are on the face. Well, that used to be pretty hard to do, but we've added a feature here that makes this easier. So this is a 3D cube. As you move through it, you get to see the slices. But what if I wanted the top and I wanted to make that a submodel? Well, what I can do is I can come up to here, right click on the row, and I can create a submodel row, or I can create a minimal submodel row. The minimal submodel would actually leave out column A and L, and it would also leave out layer 1, because layer 1 doesn't have any pixels, so it would start here at layer 2. But yeah, I can just right click here and say create a minimal submodel from that row, or this row, or this column, right, or this layer. And by a layer, this is create minimal submodel, etc. from this layer, is everything that I see here, and create submodels from them. So I think I've already done most of these. There's also create submodels from all layers, which basically goes through every layer and creates a submodel associated with it. And so then if you go in, and I think I've done this already, I've done a couple, you can see that it generates submodels. Now it's a 3D model, it doesn't render very well over here. But yeah, this one's for a column, this is the minimal one, this is, so you can see the minimal column doesn't have the commas at the beginning and the end. No, actually that doesn't make any difference. Let's go back and let's actually do this. Let's go back. So let's go to layer 1 here. Let's create the minimal submodel from that row, and let's create the normal submodel from that row. Go back into submodels. So there's our row 1. So you'll see row 1. If I make this a little bit bigger, you can see that there's a row of commas, column of commas here. There's actually another set down the right hand side here, and then there's a row at the top and the bottom. But if you look at the minimal, it got rid of all of those spare ones around the side and created the minimal submodel that included all those nodes. And you know, it's smart enough to know where they are, so it knows that, you know, the way this is wired, it starts with 391 here and it comes across, it comes down to here and then back and so forth, and it's captured all of that, so you don't have to manually create this, which would be an incredibly time-consuming activity. So yeah, generating submodels. What else is there? The SAN device is E680. While we don't support upload to the E680, I have added the E680 as a controller on here, which means that it's aware. For instance, I believe this controller only supports 4 universes. So if you go to 5, you're going to get an error. I think that's right. If someone owns a 680 and can tell me that's wrong, I'm happy to fix it, but that's my understanding. And finally, Kevin's back. Kevin is back, and Kevin has been building some transitions. So let's throw an effect in, and let's throw another effect in. So Kevin's been here playing with the transitions, and you can see he's added blobs and pinwheels and everything else. Actually, let's just put fade. So let's set an out transition on this. We'll set it for, I don't know, for 2 seconds. So what he's got is he's got a bow tie at the end here. Come on, there it goes. There's the bow tie transitioning. He's got a zoom transition. There you go, where it zooms in and transitions away. A doorway where it disappears into the background, a new one comes in. Blobs, where it basically blobs appear and suck it up, and a pinwheel. Okay, it looks like that one might need some work. Yeah, I think that one might need some work, but that's okay. So yeah, a few more transitions. Kevin's written a fair few of these, not all of them, but he wrote the circular swirl, and there's a couple others here, and the dissolve. I'm not sure he did the dissolve, but there are a couple others here that Kevin's been working on, so he quite enjoys his transitions. And that's it, guys. That's 2019.73 all the way through to 2020.10. Our release schedule's definitely been a lot slower this year, but some of the changes have been pretty big. And closing some of the gap between using xLights and using your controller and setting up your show, and I'm hoping for a big payoff in November when our new users who all start to come on board find it a lot easier to get everything configured. So thanks a lot, guys, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Please like or subscribe. It's great to receive notifications when new videos come out. And you don't get that if you just wait for me to remember to post it on whichever forum or Facebook page it is that you happen to be watching. Cheers.